Hi and welcome to the channel. This time around I'm looking at 3 more movies that Umbrella Entertainment provided to me. They're not a sponsor, but they gave me some movies which are in their label called Beyond Genres. If you have a look at that, you'll see Beyond Genres. And that's the first of the movies I'm going to talk about, heavy metal. Yeah, these ones are great because they're marginalised genre films of various kinds in this series, and there are well over a dozen of them now. In fact, heavy metal is volume 16. Some of them are region locked, other ones aren't. I'll tell you which ones of the 3 are region locked and which ones aren't. But all of them are movies that some of us remember from earlier years. Some date back to VHS days, others DVD days. And they've all got pretty good extras on them. There's solid transfers of the films. And if you are a genre film collector, particularly if you like horror, and in this case, body horror, you're going to like these 3. So we'll start off from 1981, a film by Gerald Potterton, it says here. Heavy metal. Now, people might, if they're of a certain age, remember the heavy metal comics, or if you're a certain age and you're a francophone, you may remember the Metal Hurlant comics, which preceded it. In fact, the interesting thing is, there's the cover of the outside, slipcover. And there is the inside cover, which, from the look of things, is from the Japanese. If you can see that, if I can focus on that, is the Japanese poster.
Columbia Pictures presents Heavy Metal, a trip beyond the future to a universe you've never seen before.
There's also on the inside back that poster, which shows Richard Corbin's Den character, who appears in the movie in a weird kind of way, being really heroic and looking like one of the 2 brothers in Right Said Fred. So we might as well start with this one. It says here, a universe of mystery, a universe of magic, a universe of awesome good and terrifying evil. Which pretty much sounds like any holiday I've ever been on. The voice acting is from fairly well-known Canadian actors like John Candy and Harold Ramis. Well, Carol Ramis is American, but Joe Flaherty's in there as well. Eugene Levy. So basically, all of the people from SCTV turn up in there, and the music, which is one of the reasons why there's not too many versions of this out. Music rights were a real problem for this film. Music by Black Sabbath, Blue Oyster Cult, Cheap Trick, Devo, Donald Fagen, Don Felder, Grand Funk Railroad, Sammy Hagar, Journey, Nazareth, Stevie Nicks, Riggs, and Trust. So basically, there's a lot of hair metal here. Now, how to describe the movie? The frame story is that there's a glowing green ball of ultimate evil, and that appears in various guises during the stories in this. And the animation is done in the style of the various artists who did the original comics in heavy metal. There's one scene about a futuristic cab driver called Harry Canyon, with Richard Romanus doing the voice of the character, which is based on Moebius, Moebius, the comic book artist, the Long Tomorrow comic, which appeared in heavy metal, which really does foreshadow a lot of the Corbin Dallas character in The Fifth Element. If you watch this one, you're going to see where a lot of the ideas that Luc Besson got for The Fifth Element appear. This one doesn't follow through on those ideas as much as Luc Besson does, and doesn't take it off to the weird tangents that The Fifth Element does, but you can kind of see the borrowings, let's say, from that. This movie being an adult animated feature, and there was about a 12-year history before this movie came out of adult animated features. There was Shame of the Jungle, of course. There, of course, was Fritz the Cat and its sequel, and a bunch of others. But this one is kind of at the tail end of that phase of adult animated features in an English language context. Got to remember, Japan, in some aspects, never left that genre. But the movie does have a lot of naked women with unrealistic chests, of which I'm not a particular fan, whether in reality or in animated form.
Dusty substances.
The other interesting thing, from while we're on the subject of that kind of transgressive stuff, is this movie, you've got to remember, was made in the 20th century. And in the 20th century, female human beings have pubic hair, and there's a lot of that in this film. I'll just show you a little bit of the animation there to give you an idea of how it looked. But for me, heavy metal didn't really do it for me. For a start, I'm not a particular fan of the genres of music that appear in it. And there are some very self-indulgent and slow bits of the animation. And most of the stories within the frame story don't lead anywhere. They're shaggy dog stories. They set up a premise and never land it. Now, the last story in the series about a warrior woman riding a giant plucked chicken lands that story quite well, and there's some good aspects to that as well. But yeah, it didn't really work for me. I think that the animators were too busy emulating the style of the original artists, when what they should have been doing is going, okay, how can we translate the original artwork in a way that's going to be fast-paced and meaningful? And I think they might have learned a lot by watching a bit of anime, because anime is really good at expressing action particularly, and expressing those kinds of emotions that you want to land with any kind of animated feature really well, using shortcuts of animation in a way that this movie doesn't. It does feel a little bit like the animation in things like The Masters of Time, which was around the same time as this, but it doesn't really have a dynamism about it that makes you lean into the action, and the plots and the script is kind of lame. So I wasn't particularly. Hang on, there's a cat jumping around the table here. But I'm a little bit disappointed. I remember seeing it at the time and not being particularly impressed with it. And unfortunately, my opinion hasn't changed. I know there are a lot of people who are fans of heavy metal. But for me, I've seen so much better animation, even adult animation I've seen done better. And so much really interesting genre stuff, horror, science fiction, and fantasy, done in animated form, that this kind of didn't land for me. Yes, I realise the budgets were limited, and hand-drawn cell animation is crazy expensive and difficult to do. I fully appreciate all of those things. It just didn't work. And one of the other problems too is that the voiceover work seems to be poorly recorded. The sound editing and the sound leveling in most parts of heavy metal sound like the voice actors, particularly people like John Candy, recorded it in phone booths in the middle of the night. It's a really kind of flat sound. It's at a lower level than you'd expect, particularly when the characters are doing voiceover, and that took me out of the movie more than I expected it to. So I'm kind of glad I've got it. I don't mind having this in my collection. And I want to look at getting more kind of adult animation, things like Fritz the Cat and other stuff like that. But of the three Beyond Genres that I got, this one is, for me at least, the weakest. That brings me to the second of the three Beyond Genres movies, one that I saw at a horror movie festival here in Melbourne at Cinema Nova, I think, in the city, where the directors did a Q&A afterwards. It's a lovely little piece of $1 million budget, filmed in Queensland from 2003, Undead.
Are you alright?
Now, it doesn't have stars in it particularly. It's got Felicity Mason playing a young woman who is a former beauty queen in the rural town of Berkeley. And she comes back to town to finalise some business about the family property, which is under threat from the local bank. Bank manager is a horrible creature, more so than many of the zombies that appear in the movie later. And as she comes back to town, meteors start dropping from the sky, some of them perforating people, and the people who are affected by the meteors and the gas they give off and the acid rain that keeps falling from the sky become zombies. Now, this movie I like a lot. It's directed by Michael and Peter Spearig, who went on to make some really interesting films like Daybreakers, a very different take on vampires, and the adaptation of Robert A. Heinlein's All You Zombies, which was Predestination. They then went to America and directed Jigsaw, one of the Saw movies, and did a movie called Winchester starring Helen Mirren. Now, those last two movies didn't do particularly well, which kind of stalled the brothers' career. But I like what they do, and the fact that they made this really ambitious little horror movie on $1 million budget is amazing. I remember at the time of the Q&A, they were talking about how difficult it was. There was a 12-month post-production process for this, because basically they did all of the computer-generated special effects on a laptop in 2003, and rendering took 24 hours for a 2 or 3 second shot at the definition they needed. So they spent a lot of time. It was a labour of love. They've been making home movies since they were teenagers. And they then made this one. Now, here's the inside cover on there. And there's the back where you see one of the characters, a guy called Marion, played by Mungo McKay, with his triple shotgun, which is kind of the iconic weapon in this movie. Though, if you look at the scenes right at the end, there's a shotgun with 4 barrels on it that appears right at the end of the movie. This movie's got a lot of the feels of early Sam Raimi. It's got a lot of the feels of early Peter Jackson movies. It's got comedy mixed in with the horror, and some of the comedy is quite funny. It works well. And it's got the usual amount of splatter gore effects and the usual amounts of heads exploding, guts pouring out. Now, the movie, because of that tight budget, is the acting isn't as good as it might have been. There was a rehearsal process before the movie was made, but because of those limitations that they had, they could only do 1 or 2 takes of each shot, and they had to pick the best of at the most 2 takes of any particular shot. And I think that at the front end of the film that suffers, particularly as things are starting to go west and some of the characters get hysterical. I think some of the actors might have needed some notes on that they weren't able to get provided. But again, this is part of low-budget filmmaking. You can't do everything you want perfectly, and you can't let perfect be the enemy of good. And that shows at that front end. But then, in the second and third act, the movie twists. Suddenly, some aliens appear. And they're menacing aliens who are drawing people up into the sky in a rapture-like light. They start out by doing it to insects and farm animals, and then move on to doing it to people. And then there's another pivot after that, and then there's a 4th pivot. And the Spherics play that really interestingly and well. That the fact that there's an extra couple of pivots there that we aren't really expecting works really well. I think that it lifts this movie above your usual zombie splatter kind of thing. And even though it wasn't particularly a financial success, it was a calling card for the Sperry's to get better projects as time went on. And the other cool thing about this particular version of it is, and I mentioned this last time around when I was talking about these films, there is the soundtrack to the movie as a CD that you get with the package, and I love that. And of course there's the reversible cover. I think I'm going to reverse it and make that the cover of the inside jewel case, because I like that particular artwork a lot more than I like the artwork there. And for a while the Sperry's were kind of starting to get a reputation for flipping genres in unusual ways. They did it with vampires, with Daybreakers, and they created a whole world in a really interesting way. Their world building in that movie is first rate. And they did the same thing with Predestination, which arguably are among the 2 best Australian genre films ever made. And I want to see what they do in future too. I know that when you've had a couple of flops in America, you don't get the opportunities you might otherwise. But these guys are still fairly young. And I want to see them do more interesting things, whether it's in a streaming service or a TV series or in feature films. They've got a lot to contribute, and they've got the right kind of sensibilities to do it well. But if you haven't seen Undead, get this one, because this is the movie of the 3 I'm going to talk about today, which is not region locked. So you can go to Umbrella Entertainment online, and I'll post a link to them in the description of the video. And you can get this one at a pretty good price, depending, of course, on the exchange rates where you live. Now, there are special features. There's an audio commentary with Michael and Peter Spherig and cinematographer Andy Strayhorn. There's On the Set of the Undead, Attack of the Undead short film, which is a short film the Spheerigs did a number of years before they made this one. There's a making of Undead homemade dolly video, Undead camera and makeup tests, stills gallery and theatrical trailer. This is a nice presentation. The 1080p transfer is really good too. And yeah, if you haven't seen this one, you probably should, particularly if you're a horror movie fan. And if you have seen it and you are into physical media, as many of the people who watch the channel are, you could do worse than picking up this one. It really does show an Australian twist on that kind of 1990s, 2000s gross out horror comedy genre, and I like it more than I liked it the first time I saw it, and I liked it the first time I saw it too. It really does pay off, and it's a good Saturday night sitting down with a couple of friends, having a couple of shandies and watching a horror movie. You could do worse than this. And if you're going to do that, you might as well make it a double feature, and this is the perfect double feature for Undead. James Gunn's Slither from 2006. These movies start out exactly the same way. A meteor plunging towards the Earth from space and tumbling around. The special effects on Slither are slightly better than they are on Undead. Landing in a rural area and messing shit up.
From Universal Pictures comes a film so shocking.
Now, this one, again, wasn't successful financially. But it was a calling card for James Gunn to get things like the Guardians of the Galaxy and the Suicide Squad and all the other things he's done in various ways, including Peacemaker. And there are a couple of bits here which kind of foreshadow the kind of humour you get in Peacemaker. And the cast on Slither is a lot of fun. You got Nathan Fillion playing Bill, the town's police chief. Got Elizabeth Banks playing Starla, a woman who was Bill's teenage crush and who he still has an attraction to, and she has an attraction to him. But she's married a rich guy in town. She was born poor, and so she's married a character called Grant, played by Michael Rooker. Meanwhile, the town has a foul-mouthed mayor played by Greg Henry, and he gets a lot of the best comic lines in there. Not an actor particularly known for playing comedy, but he does it really well in this film. So again, meteors hit the ground, and one of them reveals some goo, which Grant, while he's on an illicit assignation with another woman in the woods, gets a dart shot into his chest from this blob of muck, which begins to change him. Now, there's a really nice scene where he gets hit by the dart, where James Gunn cuts to a computer-generated X-ray shot of what's going on in Grant's body. And from that, you know straight away Grant's dead and there's an alien parasite taken over. Now, this is a trope that James Gunn has used in Peacemaker, the new streaming series that he's done, but he takes it in a different direction than Peacemaker ultimately took it. Things start going wrong in the town, as you'd expect. And the first way you know that something's going on in your town is a lot of pets start going missing. And Grant has created a nest in the basement of the house where he is devouring the local pets. And from there, the body horror escalates. And ultimately, the whole town gets taken over by a bunch of large pink slugs that are produced in an interesting way to help with the alien invasion. Now, there are a few really interesting tropes in here. The first one is that there's only one creature. They're all telepathically linked in a group mind. That they are all Grant. Now, there's a whole bunch of really interesting subtext in this movie about things like use of relationships, of people who grow out of relationships. There's also a very interesting dynamic about the rich versus poor in a rural town, and the privilege that the rich people have and how lucky they are and how unaware of how lucky they are, which actually made sense. One of the daughters of one of the privileged families in town has to escape the slugs, and there's a really good home invasion scene where hundreds of these slugs are invading her home, and she's got to find a way to get out. And James Gunn does some really nice tension in those scenes. They work incredibly well. They build the tension. The CG on the slugs, you got to remember, it's 2006, and it was only a $15 million budget movie. So the CG on the slugs isn't perfect, but you got to remember this is a body horror film, and James Gunn came from the background of doing things like Romeo and Juliet for Troma films. He'd actually done a couple of movies in between. He did a really interesting film called The Specials, which was a superhero movie done on a very, very low budget. Then he also did Super, the movie with Rainn Wilson and Elliot Page in it. But yeah, this is a good, honest little creature feature. There's the original artwork there that's been done for this particular Blu-ray release. There's that artwork showing the slugs entering the bathtub where the young woman is having a bath, which is a little tribute to Nightmare on Elm Street. And there are a whole bunch of little tributes to various things in this film. If you look around the town, there are things like the local high school is named after Fred Ward's character in Tremors. And one of the businesses in town is called Hennelotters, which is a tribute to Frank Hennelotter, who did Basket Case. So there are lots of little Easter eggs in this movie for genre film fans. And there's a nice chemistry between Nathan Fillion's character and Elizabeth Banks' character in this one. The two actors are really great together, and they play off each other really nicely. Michael Rooker is over the top and wonderful as the alien, and also as the husband. The husband is no better than the alien, even before he gets infected by the alien parasite. And yeah, this one's a lot of fun to enjoy. And it does go very, very well, as I said, with Undead. And you could probably do a James Gunn Film Festival and put some really interesting cinema in this, because I think among the auteur directors that we have currently, who have some prominence, people like Edgar Wright and James Gunn, Tarantino will put into a different category. But among those kind of guys, this is an interesting piece of James Gunn's cinema. Now, the extras on this, you got an audio commentary with James Gunn and Nathan Fillion, which I've got to watch because I think it's going to be a lot of fun. The Sick Minds and Slimy Days of Slither, making of featurette. Slither visual effects progression, bringing Slither's creatures to life, FX featurette. And if you're into FX, that's a good one. There's a set tour with Nathan Fillion when they were filming it. The Gorehound Gruel, Brewing the Blood. So basically how they make the gore for the movie. The King of Cult, Lloyd Kaufman's video diary, because Lloyd Kaufman, the guy who's in charge of Troma films, does a cameo in this film as well. There are deleted and extended scenes and a gag reel, so you do pretty well with this one. This one is Region B locked, which for some people is unfortunate, but see if Santa Claus or somebody can get you a region-free Blu-ray player. It really is going to open up the world for you. And it's a good catch by Beyond Genres and Umbrella Entertainment. We can kind of forget movies that are in that middle distance. Yeah, well, remember classic horror films from the 50s, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and to a certain extent the 80s. But that 30-year window after that, we tend to forget interesting and fun horror movies from that period of time. And it's understandable too. There's a lot of stuff out there, and there's a lot of stuff to remember. And I kind of like the fact that they're filling that gap with the Beyond Genres label Umbrella does. There are a whole bunch of other Beyond Genres movies that you can check out as well. As I said, I'll post a link to Umbrella's website so you can take a look at those. And some of them may well be region locked, but others may be region free. You'll just have to check that out for yourself. Heavy metal is going to be for other people. And by the way, I did get a heavy metal car air freshener to go with that movie. So that makes me a little more kindly disposed towards it. But these three films were enjoyable. But Slither and Undead, great double feature. And had I not watched them already for this video, I will be sitting down tomorrow and watching them as a double feature and eating way too much popcorn. But anyway, that's it this time around. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. You can also support the channel and my addiction to these kind of movies by donating at patreon.com/paleocinema. I'll be doing more science fiction next week, so if you're a science fiction fan, hang out for that. And in the meantime, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. watch some really bad movies full of body horror, gore, and gratuitous nudity. And I'll catch you next time.